that we're recording and live streaming, then you are good to begin the meeting.
I'm loading that up now. Okay, we are live.
All right, welcome everyone. Should we call the meeting to order? And is there, should we just approve the agenda before we go forward?
There's actually no need to approve the agenda. It will be as circulated. So you'll just move to disclosures of interest.
All right, so do we have any disclosures of interest?
Did we just lose Andrew?
I think so. I think we've just lost Andrew. There he is. Okay.
All right, do we have any mover? Oh, do we have any movers? Sorry. Do we have anyone who lists or is anyone need to list a conflict?
I don't see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, let's go to, can someone pull the agenda up on the screen?
Kathy, are you able to do that?
I'll do that here, Heather.
Thank you, Rob.
Great. So we'll go on to agenda. Thank you. We'll go on to agenda item number 3, which is reports. And looks like we've got the tourism work plan priorities update to be received for information. So I'm assuming that Brian will walk us through that.
We will just need a mover and seconder first, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Can we have a mover to discuss the report?
I see Councillor Carlton moves it.
And seconded by?
Councillor Keaveney.
Great. Do we need to do an all in favor or are we good with that?
You'll do that at the end once the report is presented.
All right. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair Andrew. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to read through the report. I think we'll have our staff also walk us through. And I just realized, well, it's my name has prepared the report. Certainly Allison and Heather both contributed their sections, so they'll be walking you through. And just to remind TAC, I think everyone is aware that we've restructured our department a bit. So Allison now is really part of the economic development portion of our department and reports to Steve Furness. So Allison will talk about some of the investment and tourism business aspects she's working on. And Heather is part of the comms team now, reporting to Rob Hatton, still very heavily involved with tourism and all the stuff that goes along with tourism marketing and communication. And then I'm focusing more on what we call our infrastructure pillar, which is mostly this year about outdoor infrastructure for trails, cycling, implementing our cycling and trails master plan. So a couple of key things. It's been a busy first quarter. Our cycling and trails master plan was approved by County Council late last year. And we've now reached out to all municipalities for their endorsement of the plan. Council asked us to take that extra step to reach out just to make sure all municipalities were aware of what's in the plan. At the same time, we feel there certainly are a lot of county direction for county staff on county roads that we are quite comfortable proceeding with. So we've been starting to look at signage. That's a big part of the plan, is getting signage on our roads, both to guide cyclists, but also to notify motorists where they can expect cyclists on the roads. And we've actually applied for some Infrastructure Canada funding, which we're, I think, quite sure that is coming. So a big chunk of that signage will be paid for through that funding. And we'd also started an outdoor public land managers group, really more as a response to almost like I call it the crisis in our outdoor areas that we saw last year, and we think is probably going to intensify this year. So many people coming, just overcoming the capacity at our sites and really not having a great visitor experience. And then also, of course, the safety aspect of people still have to make sure they're physically distancing when they're in parking lots and accessing trails in outdoor areas. So that group has been meeting a couple of times starting in December, and it's been a really good, I think everybody agrees it's probably long overdue, but we have Ontario Parks at the table, MNRF, both conservation authorities within Grey County, Grey Sauble and Saugeen Valley, our county forests, of course, and then most of the larger trail organizations, Bruce Trail, Kimberley Forest, and Kolapore. So we're meeting monthly and looking at parking as a big, probably top priority, but also communication, looking at trail etiquette, trying to educate our visitors before they arrive as to what to expect on the trails. And then for this coming summer, looking at having ambassador teams. And I think we've got at least 5 or 6 ambassador teams that can all coordinate across Grey County to help receive people. So a lot of work on that file. Next steps are to formally create terms of reference for an on-road cycling group, which we need to form. And we're looking at whether this existing trails group could be the basis for our off-road working group as envisaged in our cycling plan, the cycling and trails plan. We also finally just passed our wayfinding policy. That's been in the work for years. Some of you, I'm sure, will remember we've been talking about signage for years. The good news is that really county staff and the transportation department have been really using the guidelines in the policy for the last couple of years, but we wanted to bring it all together into one document, circulate that to our municipalities, and make sure we're all on the same page. So that just passed county council at the last meeting, and we're starting to move forward with implementation of that. And mostly on the tourism side, it will be things like some new signage at our waterfalls, our scenic lookouts, our trails, and then also an update to our signage program for businesses. So not a whole lot of different, just some newer signage and making those permits or applications for permits available. At the same time, we also forgave businesses their 2020 fees. So that'll be a nice, hopefully a little bit of help for businesses that really were struggling last year, that either if they haven't paid it, they won't be charged, or if they have paid it, it can be refunded. And then the final piece, I guess, that I've been working on is our Environics data. We've completed 2019 as a baseline and have done all the extracts for 2020. And now we're just looking at the differences between 2020 and 2019. And interestingly, most of the visitor segments seem to be fairly consistent, but where we're seeing a lot of change is we're really trying to also understand our local residents, and we call them local visitors within 40 kilometers of each downtown. And those segments have really changed. So we're trying to dig in deeper, just to understand what that means. And then fairly shortly, we'll be sharing that out with all of our partners and then businesses to help inform them and hopefully inform our plans for 2021. So I think that's it for the report. And I think maybe, should we go through the report and then we can lightly go through the, we do have a work plan that we sort of report back come back to that. So I guess I would hand it over to Allison for the investment portion.
Great, thank you so much, Brian. Yes, so with regards to investment, we continue to assist our tourism businesses with coaching and mentoring programs, which are being offered through the Business Enterprise Center. We held one webinar surrounding funding opportunities in early January. And starting next week, there are quite a number of webinars that are going to be offered through our Business Enterprise Center. We're also hoping to host an Ontario by Bike webinar next month that will target businesses interested in receiving the Ontario by Bike accreditation and also in, developing and offering cycling experiences. The calls to our business line are starting to slow down, I would say. We did have a huge uptake in the months of January and February, and the bulk of that assistance was directing our businesses to funding opportunities and assisting them with completing, their applications for the fundings, the various fundings. And I do want to note, though, that I think the slowdown is not a reflection of the need, but more an indication of the fact that the businesses have exhausted a lot of the possibilities of funding that are available to them. They've applied to the COVID Tourism Response Fund. They tried to receive funding through the Ontario Small Business Grant, and they've essentially, they're running out of avenues. I will say, though, that in some of the cases, in most of the cases, the businesses that have called have been successful in obtaining some of the grants on offer. But the loss of revenue has been so great that they are looking for more support. One of the sources of funding that will be very beneficial to some of our businesses is the COVID Tourism Response Fund. And that was done through a collaboration with RTO7, Simcoe, Barrie, and Aurelia. And we were able to attract $1.2 million to help our SMEs in the region. So we're now in the process of drawing up agreements. And once that process is complete, we will be able to share more information on the funding results. And then finally, we have the retention and expansion piece with the introduction of the business mix analysis, which we will start to offer to our municipalities this year. And the business mix analysis is essentially a classification of the businesses in the commercial areas of our downtowns in Grey County. And the idea is that once you have examined what the number and types of businesses, green spaces, residential areas, vacant areas that make up our downtowns, you can then take that information and use that to brand and market and create messaging for our downtowns. So it's very, very exciting. Many of our municipalities now offer a community improvement program. They have that in place, so that creates huge opportunities. So lots of excitement there. The intent is to work directly with our municipalities, with each one to collectively gather that information together so that no one is doing the work alone. And we have West Grey, Meaford, Owen Sound, and Hanover who are ready, starting with West Grey. So lots of stuff happening on the investment side. So now I'll pass the mic over to Heather to talk to you a little bit about all the wonderful things we've been doing on the marketing side.
Thanks, Allison. So I think there's a bit of marketing crossover with Allison. We've been working closely together on a few things campaign-wise, so I'll get to that. First, the exciting, just at the end of November last year, we launched sort of a redesign of Visit Grey of our main tourism website. We kept the same organizational structure, and it's still basically used the same way with the same type of menus and organization, but we just cleaned it up a little bit, made it more user-friendly, did some user testing, highlighted more things like some of the stories that we're telling in the blogs we want to feature more front and center. They were a bit hidden, and of course it just looks much nicer. It has a whole new skin redesign and new imagery. So check that out if you haven't yet. We launched that just, November 20, the end of November, just before we launched our Home for the Holidays campaign, which was a nice way to showcase those stories. So we've had about 35,000 people visit since it's been redone. So we've had some really great feedback. We've had a lot of people actually requesting, they still like those mail tourism information packages. So we're hoping to get back to communicating with folks and helping them plan their trip. We're seeing those increase over the last few weeks. People are getting excited for spring and summer travel. The website stats are down, obviously, a little bit over 2020, and then 2020 over 2019. Actually, we're only down slightly, only about 3%, which is great considering we haven't been doing any marketing of the website at all. We've been keeping all of our marketing and communication hyper local. So in past years, we would run large seasonal campaigns that would target large geographic areas, bringing them to our website for information. And we haven't been doing that. So people are still finding us through organic search. They're still finding us just through social media and other ways without too much marketing, but we are excited to get back and really showcase our website when it's time to do so. So as Brian mentioned, I've been working in the communications department, which still has a large tourism marketing component to it. I just have a few more team members to run things by, and I'm still communicating regularly with Allison and Brian on some things. Brian mentioned the outdoor land management meetings, so I've been attending those just to hear what those other groups are saying and some of the struggles that they're having and how we can communicate better to have people coming more prepared when they come to Grey County. So we're working closely on that and thinking about things like signage. We worked on the very first thing that came out in conjunction with economic development was the business resiliency map. So that one came out really early in COVID. And then from that, we decided we really should have something once the summer hit to show the outdoor activities. So we worked on an outdoor activity map through the summer, and then we created a winter outdoor activity map. So Brian has been doing a lot of the work on those two outdoor maps, and I've been assisting where I can. So just letting people know what's open when things were some were open and some were closed in terms of natural areas. And then now through the winter, following the lockdown, as businesses and some of our experiences reopen, we want to make sure they're prepared and planning ahead when possible. The other one more thing that came out of the outdoor land management group was we just heard a lot of the trail groups having concerns about trail etiquette. So the Bruce Trail, there's a certain kind of etiquette to follow, and there's different ones on the Georgian Trail and some of the smaller trails. So we came up with in the communications department it's basically a one-pager trail etiquette graphic. So we have that on a website as well. On our website, with a trail etiquette, a really long, more in-depth of every single type of trail etiquette and everything that trail users should be doing. But we saw some really great response to that, and a lot of our partners wanted to share it. We saw the Blue Mountain Instagram shared it in their story, South Georgian Bay shared it, the Bruce Trail shared it. So people were really liking that one snapshot of a trail etiquette piece to remind people just how they should be acting on the trails and just respecting the trail, the landowners and other users. So that was a great piece, and we'll continue to use that. We're talking about creating some more, maybe with a cycling focus and more uses throughout the summer that will become handy for quick communication through social media. And of course, working with some of the other groups like RTO7 and Blue Mountain as well, just to keep our communication concise and working together so that the visitors planning to come here and that are here are getting very similar messages from everyone. Campaign wise, we haven't been doing a whole lot outside of our local residents, but we did do a couple really great campaigns. As I mentioned, working with Allison and Economic Development team, we launched Home for the Holidays, which was really a shop local campaign, trying not to use shop local, which became really, really trendy in the fall. So just before Christmas and the Christmas holidays, we launched the campaign. It was on our website and social media. We had 9 stories, one for each municipality, and we hired local writers from that area to write about their favorite things to do and photograph. And we had these really great sort of blog stories. This is what I like to do in Meaford for the holidays, and eating and shopping and hiking and other activities. And so on Owen Sound, Hanover, each municipality had a feature. So we put those on our website, pushed them out through social media. We saw a lot of good feedback from our local residents. They were really excited to see locals and people that they knew talking about the things that they like to do locally. And we just promoted that through a hyper-local audience, only talking to our Grey County residents and getting people just interested in spending their dollars locally and getting downtown and doing those things. That kind of came to a halt after Christmas. Obviously, we tried to continue it into the new year, but we went into the lockdown period. So we stopped that campaign. Thankfully, we got everything up and posted in time before that happened. And then we were quiet for a little bit in January. But then we did decide to come out with a small campaign called Local is Calling, just reminding folks that there were still some businesses open for takeout and curbside, and that they could do that safely and still try to promote, try to spend their dollars locally at those businesses that were open and looking for business from local residents that were there. So we did that, and we did see some nice feedback as well. People, were thanking us for the reminder of some of the businesses that they were still open for those safe ways of shopping and spending their local dollars. And aside from that, we've just throughout the whole since last year, we've been focusing on a lot of safety messaging, safe visiting, and also communicating with our businesses as well with economic development through newsletters. As Allison mentioned, just reminding the businesses of all of the opportunities that are available to help through this time. And so from the comms side, we've been assisting with that as well. So it's been a busy time, but it's been good teamwork for sure. Pass it back to you, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Heather and Allison. And I think don't think we really need to go through the tracker that is provided for the committee's information. Just to note, if you remember from our last joint economic development and tourism meeting, Savannah presented the overall sort of plan for the year. So this pulls out of that plan. So some of it is obviously a crossover to economic development, but we'll be updating TAC as we go forward every quarter. And then also this tracker shared out with all municipalities across Grey County. So that's part of our monthly economic development and tourism working group meetings. Every quarter when we have this ready, we share it out. So with that, I guess we'd ask if there's any questions or comments from the committee. Or back to you, Mr. Chair, for those.
Yeah, thank you, Brian and team. Great report and lots happening, which is great to hear. I think I saw Shirley, your hand up for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I have 2 questions, if I may, for you, Allison. You mentioned the RTO tourism funding, and I know there was a great uptick in that, but do you have any sense for the businesses that have got their agreements in place when that funding will be released?
How do I say this? We're in the process of drawing up the agreements, and the way the process works, I will be able to share further information on the funding or results when all the agreements are signed, unfortunately. But Grey County had a great uptick of businesses, and I think by next month I should be able to give more information.
Okay, so it'll be a little while yet before the funds are released.
Yes.
Yes. And the business mix analysis,
Yes.
I know West Grey is starting, and that's super exciting. And
Meaford's in there too.
Meaford's in there, so that means
yes.
there will be a study
Absolutely.
undertaken then in Meaford.
Absolutely. You're second
Fantastic.
list, actually. So
We're excited, Allison. Thank you.
yes, we are. I want everyone to be excited about it. It's a great project, and it's a great way to really find the DNA of all our downtowns and get some great marketing plans out. So it's going to be exciting.
That's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Andrea, do you have a question? Oh, you're muted.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hey, I just had a question, just thinking through like the over tourism and, you know, particularly as we're close to the Laurie Forest, I'm very painfully aware of how many cars are parking there all the time now. And it's, I would say it probably pretty challenging for sometimes for the snowplows to get by, but I was just wondering, has any thought been given to like finding like a sort of designated parking spots, reclaiming some land close to key trail sites to kind of offload some of the congestion near the a lot of the trails in that area? So I'm wondering, because I think we could help in that area.
That's a great question, Andrea, and I know Brian's doing a fair bit of work on that. Before I bounce it to Brian, though, I think one of the things that's interesting when you're looking at some of the trail stops is it's a combo of visitors, but also just our growing local populations that are using these sites. So, but anyways, back to Brian.
Exactly. I would say 100%, Andrew. Like I have just noticed like a huge increase in the amount of people locally that are parking at these trail sites.
Yeah, that's, Andrea, as I mentioned, our outdoor land managers group, parking is like #1 issue.
Yeah.
So, you know, what can we do? Well, Town of Blue Mountains, thankfully, really quickly off the draw, took a report to council, and you may have seen that, but they have applied for funding for parking at Laurie, I think at Metcalf Rock, and they're looking at whether they can expand the Kolapore parking as well. That is owned by M&R. And then Pretty River Valley, they own some along a municipal right of way.
Right.
I'm just on a call on Friday with M&R Town of Blue Mountains. So they're working very hard to, as quickly as they can, see if they can get some designated parking lots. And Laurie Forest is probably the one that may come the quickest because they own land, but obviously they have to go through permit processes with Niagara Escarpment Commission, et cetera. But
So when you say they own land, who do you mean owns the land? Sorry, just to clarify.
Town of the Blue Mountains.
Yeah.
Yes. And so they are looking at creating parking spaces, probably with paid parking, like at some of their other properties, their beachfront properties.
Got it.
And then we've got a long list that the Bruce Trail is made up of roadside parking, looking at whether those can be improved. The snowplow operators have been great, sort of Town of Blue Mountains and Grey County, where possible, to push banks back and create a little more roadside parking. So we're working hard on that and trying to get as much as in place as we can for this summer. I'm not sure if we'll have any parking lots built by this summer, unfortunately. But we do hope to have quite a few ambassador teams out at the busy spots. And just from experience last summer, when you're there, you sort of, even though you're maybe not, you're not a bylaw enforcement officer, but you sort of have a presence in it, and people do sort of, if you suggest them that the area is too busy and that they need to find an alternate area, you can suggest some areas that helps to dissipate the demand.
Actually, that sort of feeds into my second question, because I was just curious about the ambassador teams. Like, do you have a sense now of where you're deploying them? Are they like a mobile unit, or how does that look? Just like broad strokes. I'm curious.
Sure, we had sort of an initial meeting with a couple of us, and since then there will be more added. So the Bruce Trail, the Beaver Valley Bruce Trail Club will have a team for the summer. Yeah. So they'll be kind of roving the Beaver Valley. Grey Highlands will have a team. I suspect that'll spend a lot of its time at Hogs Falls.
Yeah.
The county will have a team filling in the gaps all across Grey County. Grey Sauble has added, they call them gatehouses at a few additional properties. So they were at Eugenia Falls last summer. They'll be expanding to Old Baldy and I think Christie Beach. And I think there's one more. They've been at Haibu. I think there's one more I'm forgetting. And then Town of the Blue Mountains will have some ambassador teams. And then of course, Blue Mountain had ambassador teams and will have, and we're hoping we can coordinate with them so that all the teams can kind of be talking to each other. And if the place gets really busy, you know, hey, how's it over your way? Can we send some people your way? And just be a little bit more in touch. So that's the plan.
Right.
It works. Okay, we've got two other hands up. First, Sue, then Joel.
Thank you, Chair Andrew. Question for Brian, and it has to do with the parking again. I know Grace Sobel has implemented a plan whereby local residents get a reduced rate on a parking pass for the summer. Is there any thought at the county level of charging parking for the various parking lots to kind of recoup some of those costs? And maybe doing that same idea where out-of-towners pay a different rate to what the locals would pay?
I'm not sure if Scott's on the call yet. I could give you kind of the tourism slant. County forests are administered by our planning department. Is Scott on yet? You want to speak to that?
Yes, he is.
I put you on the spot with that one, Scott.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. It's something we've only loosely talked about for our county forests in the past. We are looking at doing some improvements to our county forests in terms of our trails to make them more accessible and more friendly to people that aren't familiar with the county forest properties. And as Brian mentioned in the previous discussion, parking is an issue that we're certainly starting to hear about. And so we don't have any planned capital projects to improve the parking yet, but we're starting to look into what that looks like. And it could be that once we get some more costing on that, we'll have a better understanding of where we need to go to look at A, how we're going to pay for those in the first place, and then B, how we maintain those lots and everything else. And so we haven't ruled out paid parking in the future, but it's certainly not something that we've looked at implementing anytime in the near future either. You're not going to see a paid parking booth next month at one of our county forests. So it's on our radar. I realize this is a squarely on the fence answer, but we're just not quite there yet, unfortunately.
It might be, it's Andrew here. It might be helpful to ask the Town of Blue Mountains at some point what the feedback has been on some of their parking lots where they've been charging and have provided, perks and passes to local residents. That might be, some lessons learned that I'm sure this team can take and go forward. Kim, did you have a comment there before we go to Joel?
Sure. Only that things like this are only as effective as the enforcement that you have in place to ensure compliance. I think there's a lot, like certainly Grace Sobel has had, some amount of or attempt to have paid parking for a very long time. For our local residents, I think it's a real shift in thinking that they should have to pay for what they consider to be their own assets, and the technology, et cetera, that needs to be in place to allow people to pay easily is very expensive. Mm-hmm. So there, as just further along to what Scott was saying, there are a lot of considerations going into this. But I think the point is that we want people, if they're going to use these amenities, they need to be able to do it in a way that's safe and that isn't going to have a long-term negative impact on that asset, whatever it is, right? If they're going to be doing stuff all over the place and making a mess and ruining that, that's counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here. So I think there are a lot of things for staff to think about as we go forward, but certainly I know it's something, especially for the people who live close to places, it's a concern. And I think we need to be doing more probably to try and figure out some potential answers to those problems.
Great points. Thanks. Joel?
Yeah, this is just in regards to just an idea with the signage at some of the parking areas. I've been to a lot of different like trails and stuff this winter, and sometimes, you know, you get somebody that comes in early and just parks, you know, the wrong way or something, and it kind of messes the whole system up, right? So I wonder if, like, some of these key parking areas, there could just be like a, you know, recommended, like a picture of, like, you know, recommended parking, like how you would do it, and maybe even something that the ambassadors that are going to be out there could keep an eye on, and if they notice an area where, you know, that is a bit of an issue, they could kind of keep an eye on it. But I don't think it'd be too hard to throw up a sign like that. Just yeah, just an idea to make it a bit more efficient.
Thanks, Joel. Taking my chair hat off for a second, and as a committee member, one of the things that I've learned through our operations in the village environment, and we have, you know, a lot of visitors as well as a lot of locals, and the one rule is proven true, and that is that any spaces where you have public use need management and resources. So if we expect that spaces are going to be self-managed and that garbage will be cleaned, that people will follow signs, and that the right thing will just happen, it doesn't. It has to be managed. And that comes at a cost with resources. And I think that's really what we all need to be thinking about, is how to best layer in those management approaches. And I think that's going to be a challenge for everyone, because we've been fortunate over the years to allow these sites to be sort of self-managed. But I really believe we reached a tipping point now where that's unrealistic going forward. Okay, chair hat back on. Any other comments? Nope. Okay, well, so I guess at this point then we should have a mover and a seconder, and then a round table to accept the report. Is that correct?
You have a mover and a seconder already.
That's right, to have the conversation. So now it's just...
so you'll just be voting on the motion now.
Now, can we just do it as all hands, or do we need to do a named?
Yes. No, yeah. You can do it all in favor. Mm-hmm.
So is all in favor of the motion that we have on the agenda? Any opposed? Nope.
Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Then that motion has passed, and thanks for all of the updates and all of the exceptional work. We will now move on to agenda item number 4, the growth management study update, and we have Scott Taylor joining us to walk through that report.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to try to share my screen here, and you'd think this far into the pandemic I'd know how to do it, so we'll see if that's true. So can everyone see the slide deck here?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm excited to be able to chat with you all today. What I have to present to you today is some very draft early results on the update to the county's growth management strategy. So we're certainly keen to hear the feedback from this group, because as I mentioned, they are still very much draft, and it's only through feedback through groups like this and through partners at our member municipalities that we're going to improve this document to make it what it needs to be going forward when we look to finalize that document and bring it back before County Council. So just to go over the study objectives, some of you might be familiar with past versions of the county's growth management strategy, but it really is a document that in the past attempted to look 20 years into the future and now 25 years into the future to look at both what our housing growth would be over that time period and what our employment growth, and the two, of course, are very much linked in that regard. And then we use this document for a number of purposes. From my planning hat, first and foremost, we use it to inform our official plan. And so if we know that we have X number of houses coming to our county over the following, in this case, 25 years, Do we have the available land, and do municipalities have the available servicing capacity to accommodate those houses? And furthermore, as our population ages, what types of housing are we going to need? And will things look different 20 years from now than they do today? And I think this study is very key to helping informing that. And then, of course, we share the results with our member municipalities, who can then drill down further on the results and look at their own communities and make sure that they're prepared to accommodate both the employment and the population growth in this regard. And you've heard me mention both 20 and 25 years. One of the key differences here is there used to be a provincial policy that told us when we're doing our planning at the official plan stage, it can only look 20 years out other than for infrastructure purposes. In 2020, the province changed that to say that we can now plan for 25 years and even further beyond that for infrastructure. One of the other key things that we're looking at through this version of the growth management strategy, which is of course new, is what are the impacts of the pandemic? And I know anecdotally, and what we've been hearing about around the tourism table, is we're seeing lots of interest in outdoor spaces, but we're also seeing lots of interest in people moving to the county, or in some cases, people that had seasonal residences in the county now wanting to stay here full time and even enrolling their kids in our local schools. So we want to make sure we're on top of that, but we also want to make sure that we're not over planning based on a situation that hopefully might be over in the next 6 to 18 months in terms of the pandemic. So we want to kind of figure out what both the short and long-term effects of that might be. So in recent years, we've seen a lot of growth around the edge of the GTA. And they're saying the outer edges that typically didn't see higher rates of growth are now all seeing quite high growth within the past even just 3 to 5 years. And this slide is a little bit confusing because each of the different counties and regions are at different scales. But what you can see for Grey County, for example, is between the year 2006 and 2016, in terms of those census periods, the growth was fairly flat. Some years we even saw a bit of a decline. So there wasn't a lot of new growth there. But you can see between 2016 and 2020, it's just shot right up, and we actually haven't seen those levels of growth since the late 80s. And Grey County in this regard isn't unique, and you can see again in a lot of these outer ring communities, the growth in the past 5 years is really accelerating. And so as planners and as tourism operators, we definitely need to be aware of this, and we need to look at the impacts on our communities. And so just to drill down a little further, some of the data that's been used for this has of course, been Statistics Canada data. And when we get the results from the 2021 census, probably sometime next year, we're going to have a look at those as well. We've been looking at Ministry of Finance projections. And then we've also been looking at data supplied both from the county and our member municipalities in terms of things like building permits and planning applications to help inform what we think our growth is looking like in that regard. With respect to some of the housing work that's been done, certainly it's no surprise that there's still lots of interest in developing both seasonal and permanent housing in Blue Mountains. They have been driving growth in recent years in the county, but it's certainly not just Blue Mountains, and we've got some very big new projects that are starting to get underway in Owen Sound, some large new subdivisions. And one of the exciting things about some of those subdivisions is we're getting a real mix of housing types. It's not just single detached dwellings and semis. We're getting more townhouses, and we're actually getting some apartment buildings and condo apartment buildings in that regard. So that's really exciting to see. In terms of some other municipalities, we're seeing lots of interest in Hanover, and Hanover's actively taking steps to look at their long-term growth needs in that regard. We're seeing a ton of interest and a ton of development in Southgate, and as some of you may have heard, it seems like the Highway 10 effect is simply moving north. You had Orangeville and then Shelburne, and Dundalk has really been the next it community. And in terms of if we look further north on Highway 10, we've seen some big new approvals in Markdale as well. So it's certainly something we're monitoring in that regard, because in some cases, that growth we're seeing along Highway 10 is a little different to, say, maybe the growth of Blue Mountains, and some of the Highway 10 growth is really being fed actually by commuters, people that are commuting back to the GTA. And one of the things that the pandemic has taught us so far is there's a lot of people that used to be commuters that now simply no longer need to be. And so we're wondering what this is going to do, and whether this is going to open people's eyes to the fact that, they can live in a beautiful community like Grey County and still maintain their jobs elsewhere. So it's something we're looking at. As I mentioned earlier in the call, servicing is a key component to this, and we're certainly wanting to work with our member municipalities to make sure that they have the adequate water and sewer services ahead of time to meet the growth demands and not struggling to catch up after the fact. With respect to our countywide forecasts, we are looking at, this is again a best guess, a best forecast, approximately 23,000 new people between 2021 and 2046 over that 25-year horizon. And what you can see as you go through the subsequent census periods there between 2021 and 2026 and 2031 is that we are at what we think is going to be a bit of a high water mark in the coming years for growth, and certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, we're still going to see significant amounts of growth, but then those rates will slowly start to peter off if our projections are correct in that regard. And one of the reasons for that is pure demographics, and the baby boom group is moving their way through the system, and luckily for Grey County, we're seeing lots of them choose to retire and locate in Grey County. But future generations, aren't producing at the same rate as some of the earlier generations did. So one of the key things that we're looking at in that regard, and that we're working with Savannah's team on, is to make sure that the county is an accommodating place to new Canadians. And it really is new Canadians that will be driving a lot of the growth in the future. So we want to make sure that that we're doing what we can to be accommodating in that regard. And some of these trends that we're seeing in terms of slower rates of growth as we get 15 and 20 years out certainly aren't unique to Grey County, and lots of rural Ontario will be looking at very similar trends in that regard. And some parts of rural Ontario are even looking at potentially population decline in some of those periods. So Grey is actually very well situated in terms of what we're forecasting at this stage. And again, just to give you that historical context, if you look at 2021, we're looking at a 1.4% growth rate compared to 2011, when we actually had a negative growth rate. And you really need to go all the way back to 1991, when we had that 2.5% to look at where we had growth at this level. So what does this mean if we're saying approximately 23,000 new people? What does this mean in terms of the number of new households that we'll see? And we are looking at just slightly over 10,000 new households over this same 25 years time frame that we're looking at. And I should note that this is primarily looking at the permanent households, and they do the seasonal unit forecast in a little different way, and we'll get to that in just a second. But that really puts it into perspective. And in the next 25 years, if you think about our communities across Grey, where are we going to accommodate 10,000 new households? And we think about the housing type, and obviously we're going to see more single detached dwellings, but where are we going to see some greater density in terms of our townhouses and apartment units in that regard? And as the population ages, and people maybe are moving out of some of their larger homes, what are they going to be demanding in terms of those downsized units in that regard? So it's certainly something that we're trying to think about and stay on top of. The consultant has put together some very draft figures on what they see as how that housing might break down in terms of the singles and the semis and the townhouses and the apartments. I will say this is something that we're actively feeding back on, and even just within the past 2 years, I think we've seen much greater interest in new apartment development than we have certainly in my time in being with the Grey County Planning Department. So my personal thoughts are these numbers for apartments might actually even be a little bit on the low side, and we might start to experience more demand as we go through this growth period in that regard. So it's something that we're trying to provide some further feedback to the consultant on. With respect to employment, the one thing that you'll see if you look at sort of the housing forecast and the employment forecast is, the employment isn't necessarily keeping up to the same degree that the housing growth is. And again, if we look at our demographics, that's not 100% a surprise in this regard. We are seeing more retirees and people in their golden years come to the area. But this employment piece is something that we and primarily also the economic development team really want to stay on top of in terms of looking at the types of employment that Grey County is experiencing now and into the future, and trying to make sure that we have a positive environment for employers to set up shop, but also to expand in this regard. And if we go on to the next slide, it talks a little bit about the types of employment, broken down into very broad categories. So population related is kind of just as it sounds almost in that regard. So if you have more people, you're going to need things like more pharmacies and more restaurants and more services to sustain them. The employment land piece is more so our business parks, whether they be industrial or office in that regard. And then the rural piece is of course our rural economy, and we have seen great growth in that in recent years in terms of things like farm gate sales, on-farm tourism, and also in our Mennonite and Amish communities, a lot of on-farm businesses and small-scale on-farm manufacturing in that regard. So again, it's something that we're monitoring and we're actively looking to groups like this to say, have we got this right? What are you seeing in terms of your own businesses and your future employment demands in that regard? And are we going to have the appropriate labor pool to meet the demands that we need? And again, Savannah and her team have done excellent work on this, and we work with Gemma, the 4-county labor market planning board, to really dig into some of these numbers further in that regard. With respect to, so if we say we're going to have approximately 10,000 new households or 23,000 new people, where are we going to see this growth across the county? And it's no surprise that all of our communities are growing, which is very positive. But some are growing at a more rapid rate than others. And certainly places like Blue Mountains and Hanover and Southgate and Owen Sound are on the higher end of the spectrum, and other communities like Chatsworth might be on the lower end of the spectrum. But I think it is really positive that we are seeing this growth across all of the county, but noting, as I said earlier, some of the growth takes different forms. So the growth in Owen Sound or the growth in Blue Mountains might be very different than the growth we see in Southgate, where it's commuter driven, or in Chatsworth, where it's a different type of growth in that regard as well. So that's what we're seeing as the draft allocations at this stage. And certainly if we wanted municipal feedback, this is the slide to show them. And we've heard from a number of our municipalities already to say, hey, listen, I don't think you've got our numbers quite right, and we think we should be more X instead of Y. So we're so thankful to receive that feedback from municipalities who are on the ground, dealing with building permits, dealing with both residential and employment inquiries every day. So it's that feedback that we really need to hear in this regard. And then this is just a similar table that shows how we're looking at those household allocations might play out by municipality and then by the different unit types. I will say we have flagged this table as needing some adjustment to the consultant, particularly the lower table there, where you see that for whatever reason, Hanover and Southgate and West Grey we're all flagged as having 0 new apartment buildings in the next 25 years. We know that's not going to be the case. So I was actually on a call with a consultant yesterday, and they're going to be looking at some changes to this in that regard. So it's just, again, our best educated guess at how this growth might be allocated, but certainly through the growth management strategy and through the county official plan, it's certainly not meant to say that we're putting the brakes on any one municipality. So if in 10 years time, you've already hit your 25-year target, it's not like the taps get turned off and you don't get to grow anymore. It means you've exceeded the target, and we need to work to make sure that we have that land supply available and infrastructure available to meet the needs in that regard. And then this is that similar breakdown again in terms of the employment piece. And, again, it's no surprise that communities like Owen Sound and Hanover, maybe bat a little above their weight class in terms of employment. And I think we can all see it within our own communities that there's people that, live in the countryside and commute into town for work. But it's interesting to see the share of the growth, of course, in Blue Mountains, but even in a number of our municipalities. And in some cases, the employment rates are higher in some of the municipalities that weren't seeing quite as high rates of growth than others. So West Grey is one that had maybe more of a moderate growth rate, but is still looking at a decent share of the employment growth in this regard. So we find that really fascinating, and it's something we're digging into a little further with the consultant in that regard. And then the seasonal forecasts. This is one that's very difficult to apply a standard methodology to. So in terms of standard residential employment forecasting, you look at things like birth rate and death rate and migration rates, and those can give you a decent picture of what you're looking at in terms of your growth. It's much harder to say, how many people are going to choose to buy a cottage or a chalet or a second home in Grey. And it's something that the consultant is actively working on. The other thing we find with respect to some of these seasonal units is in their lifespan, they can be very cyclical. Somebody might build a second home and choose to use it as their second home, but when they go to sell it, someone might buy it and use it as a full-time home. And similarly, when they go to sell it, might go back to being a second home. So it can be cyclical in that regard. And it's something that we're trying to better understand. But obviously, the other thing is certain municipalities are affected in a much greater way on the seasonal forecast than others. So, Meaford and Grey Highlands and Blue Mountains have far higher rates of seasonal residents than a community like Hanover would in that regard. And so it's one of those things that we can't apply a one-size-fits-all approach across the county in that regard. And so the next steps are to get feedback on this, as I said, from groups like yours, from municipalities and others that are interested in development, to continue to dig into the data. One of the things that we're trying to work on further is talking to our school boards to see what they've seen in recent years in terms of enrollment, and was there a pandemic bubble in that regard, and to further dig into what we think the COVID related impacts might be. And then ultimately, we're going to have the consultant prepare a final document, and it will be presented to council. And then we'd look to implement that into an updated county official plan. The one other thing I should mention here is, although this is a 25-year forecast, it's not like we're going to finish this study and then sit on it for 25 years. This will require regular attention and regular updates. And just even in the past 15 years, we did the study in 2008. We updated it in 2015. We updated it again in 2018, and now we're updating it again in 2021. So it very much is a living document, and certainly a forecast of this nature is very much a product of its time. So, in future years, once we have additional census data, we would look to update this further along with local growth data. So I know I've talked a lot here. I am done talking now, so I'm certainly happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Scott. That was very interesting. Do we have any questions from the team? Maybe I'll start the ball rolling. I'm wondering if Scott, if you can share what you think the biggest implications of this new set of data would have on municipalities going forward. So is it infrastructural preparedness? Is it outdated zoning bylaws? Like what do you think that the challenges of this data set are for municipalities in the county right now? The biggest ones?
Sure, that's a great question. One of the biggest maybe surprises, but also not a surprise, is that the growth has accelerated to points that, you know, even in 2018, we certainly weren't predicting. And you know, I think in 2018, there were some municipalities and perhaps the county as well that thought we had a little bit more time to get certain things in place. And now we're realizing that there is just massive demand, particularly on the residential side. And I know there are a few municipalities across the county that are now struggling to look at upgrades to either their water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants to meet the level of growth that's coming to their doorsteps. And in some cases, they have large plans of subdivisions that have already been applied for that, you know, based on today's servicing levels, we could actually only service the first couple phases of those developments and not the whole development. So there's a few municipalities across the county that they're actively looking at, you know, how we fund those infrastructure upgrades in that regard. I think that's perhaps been the biggest surprise here from a county perspective, and certainly, Andrew, I think you touched on it. We do need to make sure that our municipal and county planning documents are up to date. We do have some standards across the county that could certainly be improved upon. And as we see more interest in more dense forms of housing, we need to make sure that we're keeping up with that in that regard. And the province has made a number of changes to further allow for things like secondary units, both, you know, a basement apartment or even the separated kind of coach house style unit. We need to make sure that you know, things like our parking standards and our servicing levels can accommodate the demand for that. And then the other kind of side piece is working with our community and working to educate, you know, both everything from home builders to landowners on the need for affordable and attainable housing. And we've had some unfortunate examples where people have proposed some, and we've heard a lot of very negative feedback from some communities and some neighbors. And you know, I put it down to, in some cases, almost a lack of understanding of the level of need that is there. And if we do hope to supply our businesses with employees, you know, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So that's one of the other things that I think collectively as a county and 9-member municipalities, we really need to work on. And council has struck up a task force on this that has done some amazing work. And we look to carry forward with that work to really help address some of that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Sue?
Thank you, Andrew. Excellent report, Scott. And I'm just going to kind of comment on one of the sessions I sat in through Good Roads, and I forget the gentleman's name who spoke, but he called it Drive Until You Qualify. And your report really kind of backs up exactly what he was saying, where young couples in Toronto can't afford to get into the housing market there, so they drive further out until they qualify. Then as they need to, their family has grown, they need a bigger house, they drive further until they can qualify for a mortgage or housing they can afford. So I think we're starting to see the results of that out here somewhat. And as a second item, he commented on that, and this maybe goes more economic development certainly than tourism, but that a lot of these people will be working from home, but they don't necessarily want to do all their meetings from home with little kids or the dog running around behind them. So they're looking for some kind of community hub where they can go to and rent an office for a day. So that may be something we need to look at with, say, even the former Sydenham School. Are there things like that we can put in there that make it more attractive for those people coming to the area? His other comment was what's going to drive a lot of this growth is international students coming to the country doing their studies here, then wanting to stay, and that we'll see a lot of those wanting to move further out as well. So just some comments from the Good Road session.
Thank you. Great comments. Any other comments or questions? Shirley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, really great thoughts, Sue. And just adding to what Scott was mentioning in relation to density, and I'm not sure if every other municipality is in the same position as Meaford, but we're having a real struggle helping our residents get their heads around density. They're not ready for it. They're not grasping the need for this housing, and we have a lot, almost all of the developments we have proposed now are in the attainable category. And I've actually had residents contacting me now saying we don't have enough high-end housing. There's more folks in their categories that want to come to the area, and now we're not getting, the $1 million homes that that some of those folks are looking for. So it's a really interesting shift in who's coming and what they're looking for.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic. But when you look at 10,000 new households, it's something each community really has to grapple with. And I think one of our challenges is we're not taking a long view all the time. And I think that's what we have to do with our local communities and really have good open discussion about it. Yeah, it's a challenge. It makes me think that that's one of the biggest implications for municipalities, in my opinion, is communication and outreach, and how this gets communicated, discussed proactively. Community forums before developments are on the books. It was an interesting dynamic I'll share from the Attainable Housing Corporation in the town of Blue Mountains, and I can speak to this because it was provided as a report in the public. But there was a real drive for the corporation to go in advance and create some mock-ups of what the Attainable Housing Project will look like, in an effort to get people's feedback and input. And it was actually perceived by some as, oh, the drawings were too good. They were too sort of like almost too polished. It looked as though, and it was interpreted as though it was a fait accompli and it was being, sort of rushed through. Meanwhile, the intent was actually to just show people what it could look like and get conversation. So I think all of these planning best practices around community consultation, to me, need to happen pre-project. They almost need to happen community by community. So I don't have the answer, but I've certainly been living and experiencing what that's like to go through. It's a challenge, and everyone has a legitimate point of view. So that's the hard part. But yeah, amazing. Scott, my last question, has this already been shared with municipalities in the town or in the county?
Yeah, it has been shared with municipal staff. At this point, we're looking for feedback in this regard. So we've got feedback, I think, from 6 of the 9 municipalities so far, and the other 3 have said, hey, it's coming soon, it's coming soon. And then, like I said, we have reached out to other partners that are key stakeholders in this regard, like the school boards, to try to really understand what they're doing in that regard. Because, just because a community has X number of new houses, what does that mean? Are they houses for young families? Are they houses for seniors? Are they mixed? What are we seeing in terms of our school population? And so we've really tried to reach out to as diverse a group as possible to try to get the full picture. Knowing, of course, we can never hit everybody, but there's been so many good comments raised just in this brief discussion here about what this means moving forward and the different housing types we need and the different community attitudes in this regard. So this will be one component of it, and then the next component will be when we go to update the official plan, and that's when we'll be looking for more of that direct community feedback rather than just kind of input on the data, so to speak.
Yeah. my final comment is that you were describing that. To me, what will be interesting is trying to understand what are the leading and the lagging measures, and depending on the decisions made. So, for example, if we're looking at sheer population movement as driving the housing demand, which then drives economic response, I think that's one way of looking at it. Another might be that built form decisions are made, which drive certain economics, which then drive certain population movements beyond just the current trend of boomers and leisure residents at that larger cohort. So I think there may be a way of looking at this, which is sort of how it will naturally occur, and also maybe how it could occur, and what kind of priorities need to be layered in to help drive an outcome that the communities want. So I'm not sure how far that has been put into this, but that's something that this data has made me think about, if that sounds clear.
If I could just respond to that, that's a great point. And some of you may have heard the story before, but the city of Brisbane in Australia did a really neat exercise when they were updating their planning documents, and they had determined that they were going to grow by X number of people over a 20-year period. And they put it down to, okay, so if we divide that into on a monthly basis, here's how many new apartment units or homes we're going to see on a month. And so they designed a little app that people could access on their phones, and to say, listen, if we know that we need to accommodate this number of people, how should we be doing it? And basically, as a user of this app, you could put in more single detached dwellings, you could put in things like townhouses, or you could put in sort of higher rise apartment condo style development. And as you did so, it would give you little inputs along the way. So if you chose to put them in all as single detached dwellings, it would tell you things like, okay, well, this means we're going to be using more lands. And this means that by and large, people will have longer commute time. So, if they want to drive into the city to shop or to work or what have you, this is the impact of that. And then similarly, if you were putting in all apartment buildings, it would give you little feedbacks. And then at the end of this exercise, once you'd accommodated that number of buildings and that number of people, it would give you the opportunity to sort of share your score or share what you did with other people, so people could share it on social media. But then it would also tie back to, okay, now that you've had this little crash course in planning, is there feedback you want to give? And what the city planners said there is the most interesting part was the conversations it drove in the community. So they would go and they would do presentations in school classrooms, and each of the kids would try it on their phones. And then they would go home and tell their parents to do it. And quite often the cities that the kids and teenagers were developing were very different than the cities that the parents were developing. And those conversations were really unique. And she told the story of one, I think it was about a 15 or 16-year-old kid that had lived out in the suburbs on a beautiful big house, on a big lot and everything else. They had a swimming pool and a nice large yard. And their city was almost entirely condos. And he took it home and showed his parents, and they said, well, I just don't understand. We gave you a great childhood. You had a pool, you had a yard. And he said, yeah, Mom and Dad, I don't want to spend 3 hours a week cleaning the pool. I don't want to cut grass. I want to live in a condo and be within walking distance to a restaurant and everything else. And it was just, the way they described it was so worth it in terms of generating those conversations and as an educational tool to say to people, like, listen, there's nothing to say that we can't have more single detached dwellings. So there's nothing to say that we can't have more condos, but just realize that each choice we make has impacts, whether it be from a traffic perspective or from a servicing perspective or municipal cost of infrastructure. And sorry, I'm really rambling here, but I think it was just a great, succinct educational way of putting it. And so we've tried to replicate that through other tools, because we haven't been able to design that app yet at Grey County, that we can talk to people on to say that, listen, as you said, Andrew, the choices we make and the built forms and densities we're looking at do inform, how expensive it is for a municipality to service that development, or our traffic levels or other such things. So I think there's a real opportunity here for planners and also people around this table to start to have those conversations with people, because as someone said earlier, everyone's point of view in the community is valid. But we just need to help people understand the different changes and impacts that can come from different forms of development. So I'll be quiet now. I apologize.
If I can add just to what Scott's saying, I believe the day will come when you will know what your personal kind of climate footprint is and the greenhouse gas emissions that you are responsible for. And, you know, how you're living your life and how much space you're taking up, and all of those things will, I think, become much better and more broadly understood for people. You could see how the tables could turn a little bit, that, bigger and more and stuff like that might eventually get to a time where that's not as easily kind of, people wouldn't be so proud of that as maybe what happens now. So it's just different information.
Yeah, the intersection of green and environment certainly has a role. Sure. Yeah. Wow. Well, what a good stimulating conversation. So we'll, I guess, will next steps be brought forward? Because I think it is definitely something that impacts tourism, no doubt. So we'll want to pay close attention to that, I think. Shall we, with that, I don't know if we need to, it's not a final report for approval, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the roundtable discussion points. Just about business been to date, outlook for summer, any workforce challenges. Who would like to start? What if we started with Joel?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, what we noticed last year, which, I mean, it's no news to anybody, is we've had basically, my business, we were fully booked all summer. We cut our capacity way back just to deal with all of our protocols and just to be responsible and whatnot. But yeah, we noticed that especially in the sort of anywhere where people could get outdoors that was easily accessible, there's an incredibly high demand. So yeah, just whatever the implications of that are for, and it's been talked about with parking and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we've noticed that. Then of course the flip side of that is some of our friends and whatnot in the industry that have brick and mortar places that are not experiencing that as well. So it's just a matter of how can we help those businesses that are not seeing the benefits of people wanting to get outdoors, just to kind of balance things in the tourism industry. And I don't know what those answers are, but that's kind of the main challenge that I'm seeing right now in this sort of COVID climate that we're in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that probably we all kind of share that perspective. How about you, Andrea? Oh, you're on mute.
Just so I'm clear, is just this the roundtable? The purpose of this is just to share my insights, or what? Where are we going with this?
Yeah. How's business been? What is your outlook for summer 21, and if you 2021, if you have any workforce issues or outlook to share?
Yeah, so I would say we were fortunate through the pandemic as we were able to leverage our the outdoor space, which was obviously at a premium. Everyone wanted to be outdoors, and you could safely socially distance. We had 2 large tents, so and then everyone was outdoors. So that our business was actually up during the summer months, obviously not in the peak downturn, but of the first lockdown. That's when we renovated. So we are going into 2021 very, I think, optimistic. I will say that I don't think we will have the snapback that we had in the first lockdown, because there will be a lot more restaurants that will be open. But I think it's like, how can we, I guess the question I'm sort of wrestling with is like, how can we like all work together to, you know, maximize going into this summer? Because I feel like everyone was, to a certain extent, we're all trying to navigate this ourselves. But if there's any key lessons learned, like there's individual lessons learned, but what are the best practices that we could all share going into 2021? That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's certainly something for this group to think about is there an operator forum that we could look at hosting prior to summer where people could just share some of those lessons learned? You know, it'd be a great opportunity for this group to just pull the tourism operators together on a nice Zoom call or something. Good facilitated session. Yeah. Joel, did you have your hand up?
Oh, sorry, that was an accidental click.
Oh, okay. No worries. Thanks, Andrea. Who else would like to jump in from your either business or local region? Shirley, do you want to share?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, I think we're also, I own a fast food restaurant, and we're also looking forward to 2021 and already starting to see an uptick as we get through winter and into early spring. I do think workforce is going to be the biggest challenge again, and recognizing that that's been discussed recently in other groups, and I think everybody is on it, so to speak. And I think the thought from my perspective that sort of came out of the last meeting we had, Andrew, with your group, was how do we really promote the sites where jobs are listed? Because it seems to me that people somehow are just not aware of where they should go to find job postings. So that's anything that we can work on, is just getting the word out of what those sites are and how people reach them and who they can contact and that sort of thing. But yeah, getting enough staff is going to be a major challenge, recognizing that we are back in the same position we were before the pandemic started, of being in an area with the lowest unemployment rate in Ontario, and where are we going to get people? So that's the biggest issue from my perspective.
Yeah. Yep. Very great points. I share that. Absolutely. Big concern. Sue.
Thank you. I'm going to look at this from a municipal perspective, in that we're looking at getting our facilities opened up again, looking at getting parks opened up. We had renovations done last year in the Sarawak Family Park to make everything more wheelchair accessible or handicapped accessible. We're still kind of looking at, are we going to leave the ice in at Shallow Lake to allow our locals to make use of that a little longer? It's sort of figuring out how to get everything opened up again in a safe way and keep our staff safe, as well as the residents and the tourists that want to come and use it. So I think that's one of the biggest focus things for us right now.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Shirley?
Thanks, Andrea. I'll just come back at it from that perspective as well. In Meaford, we are, where last year, as our staff were saying, they just really, we shut everything down. And now this year, there's just a lot more learning and a greater level of comfort and knowledge. And yeah, we're getting our pool open. We're getting our splash pad chlorinated so it can be open. It's more a thinking of, okay, how are we going to do this, rather than, we're not going to do it at all. Now I think there's just a lot of interest and understanding and knowledge at play, and we're moving forward, and residents are just thrilled that they're going to have these facilities to attend this year, and it's going to make such a difference to their mental health and just to their overall well-being. And I think we're all on the same page in doing that.
That's great. I think those more recreational assets across all of our municipalities will certainly take the pressure off some of the high traffic zones that were experienced last season. So I think that's actually really good to hear. Go ahead, Joel.
Just going back to what we were talking about with staffing and whatnot, and what Shirley was saying before. Sort of just from my perspective, this coming summer, we're not seeing a huge issue with, we're not anticipating having a huge issue with getting enough staff, because we are running at, reduced capacity. And there's probably a lot of other businesses that are cutting things back a little bit here and there just to deal with protocols and whatnot. But where I'm seeing it's going to really happen will be next summer, when hopefully, if things go well, we're back to a bit more of a normal thing. And the tourism industry, with a lot of seasonal workers, you do kind of rely a little bit on people who come back season after season, or just having a little bit of carryover from previous seasons, but that's been cut off for 2 seasons basically. So we're going to lose a lot of those people to wherever, they may go to another industry or something. So I think we should really be looking further forward to next summer, when we don't have that continuity of people coming back season after season.
Mm-hmm. And also international travel will have opened up, so there's going to be big demand to go away. So that's something that I think we'll see a little Echo Valley at that time for sure. Just to add to the discussion points, it's interesting following the discussions with at the provincial level, and Minister MacLeod is really working with Destination Ontario to drive a staycation campaign for this upcoming summer and fall. And a lot of that focus is around travel and stay local. And they're looking at creating itineraries. And they reference a number of geographies, and they have a task force, and I believe there's someone locally on that task force. So I do think that we're going to see more of that staycation dynamic come, and I think that's going to be a driver. I think we're going to have to pay attention to that and make sure, if itineraries are being created, that they're created in a way where those capacities can be managed. And so that might be an opportunity for us to feed into that process. I think no matter what, the people are going to be coming here for outdoors, hiking, cycling, and all that stuff. So I think one of the things, Andrea, that I've been thinking a lot about is for the tourism operators, it's how do we be relevant and speak to and welcoming to those cohorts. So that's what we're spending a lot of time thinking about. So how can we be a destination for hikers and cyclists? What kind of infrastructure can we put in place to welcome them? How can we communicate with those folks? So to me, this season, I think we have an opportunity to just figure out how to better align with those people who are coming. And I think if we can be partners with those natural areas in buffering demand and offering services and support, that might be a real opportunity. So that's something we're thinking about for summer, spring and summer. On the challenges for sure, workforce, Shirley and others, it's a big issue. I can tell you we have members now who are actually dialing back their operations strictly because they don't have the staff. So they could be operating at a higher level, particularly accommodators, but they just don't have the people power in order to do that. And what I think what keeps me concerned from a county level is that some of these employers are big demand drivers. And they either don't have the staffing to operate, or they have not yet been permitted to operate at full capacity based on the recovery. So that will continue, I think, to put some downward pressure on destinations and businesses that rely on those demand drivers. So that's something I'm paying a lot of attention to. When we did meet with the Labor Supply Task Force, we've rebooted that task force. We're going to be expanding it beyond tourism, and it'd be more of a regional economic workforce initiative, but tourism will obviously have a big role because we're such a large employer. But the priorities we've talked about really are, infrastructural are still key. Housing and transit are becoming more important. Getting better data across the region in terms of the scope and scale of the job requirements. In the last time we sort of started working on the labor force and that advocacy work, we deprioritized marketing because we really felt that we had infrastructure gaps to meet before we could go to different markets and encourage more people to come. And we're of the opinion now that at least willingness and recognition and awareness of those infrastructure needs are in place. And we have had momentum on transportation. We have had momentum on attainable housing. So we feel it's probably time to start collectively promoting South Georgian Bay as a great place to work in other markets. So we're thinking about that. Really wanting to make sure that we focus on training and capacity. There's a lot of skill sets that we think need refreshing, including things like customer service and working with people one-on-one. And then, like Shirley mentioned, promoting the assets that are already there. So that's certainly on our priority list. Does anyone, I think we've covered everyone. Jim, I don't know if you have any comments to make, and then anyone else from the county team?
I'm a listener today more than I am at anything else. I'm usually fraught with comment, but this time I'm enjoying the whole process.
Super. Well, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Yes, I will.
As I know you will. Does anyone else from the county, any other points you want to raise? I know I think we're scheduled for another 30 minutes, but we're coming pretty close to the end. Any other comments to raise, Brian?
Andrew, thank you. And part of our hope in having this conversation is certainly, like everybody, we're trying to think about, what does 2021 look like, how to plan. And as Heather mentioned, really to date, we have not done any external marketing, and we're certainly hoping that will evolve as we head into spring and maybe summer, and it'll be the right time to do that. So I'm not sure if anybody else has any thoughts. One is sort of around resident sentiment, are our residents ready for us to start to be out there welcoming visitors back? Are they comfortable with that? So if anybody's hearing any of that you want to feed in, that would be great. And then I think our next step is we are hoping on our monthly tourism and economic development working group call with our municipalities to start, engaging them in sort of some thinking ahead for 21. So that I think will happen at the end of March. So that was really what we hope to start today, was that conversation that's going to be ongoing. And certainly if any of our other team or comms has anything you guys want to jump in with, or anything else we need from TAC, let's get that on the table.
I might make a comment if you don't mind. I happened to back onto the Georgian Trail, and I was amazed during the summer of how many people were walking, and how many dogs there were, and how many bicycles there were, and how many runners there were. This winter has been remarkably high volume, right through from cross-country skiers, snowshoers, and the fact that they're grooming the trail behind here now is just making all the difference in the world. There's a lot of people up here all along, not only in the weekend, but during the week. So I don't know whether or not they've moved up here or what's going on. So it's pretty rewarding what the trails are affording up here for us.
Yeah, it's great to see that infrastructure come online, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is.
And I think I would put that in the example of, great lesson learned to care for an asset in the winter, which adds all this extra added value. And it was there all long. And so it's
Yes.
like almost like a great learning, right? And I'm sure we all have a number of those. You know, one of the things that keeps me awake at night, and I think is something to think about from this group, is there is sometimes a lot of confusion between zones, between public health districts, particularly it relates to the county, and the eastern part of our county, and then the western part of Simcoe, but I'm sure it exists in other areas. Certainly, I think one of the things that Grey County can think about as you look at your marketing plans might be more focused on helping to distinguish who and where Grey County is, and you know, some of those dynamics that make us unique, and helping us to differentiate from other geographies that are often confused as us. So, you know, that's probably a bit more germane to the Blue Mountains side of things, but I'll tell you, it's really difficult when you have a green zone abutting by a lockdown zone, and then the confusion in the marketplace over who can do what. So I certainly think for the county's marketing perspective, anything this group can do to just educate people about facts would be helpful along the way, I'm sure.
Well, Andrew, if you can see, Rob has his hand up, and then after he's done, I've got a quick.
Sure. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry, I didn't see that. Oh, there it is. It blended
No,
into the
no
trees.
problem, Andrew. Yeah, it's when we start opening up our marketing, it's certainly going to be a kind of complicated situation, because we're going to have to balance the needs of businesses with the safety and well-being of residents and what their wants and needs are as well. So as we get to that stage, and we are starting to think about messaging, and our marketing strategy, but I think Heather, Savannah, Brian, and I have a lot more to talk about before we get going on rolling any of that out. But we're certainly going to need the support of the Grey County Emergency Control Group and County Council through some form, whether it's via this committee or a committee report, I think, before we can really start pushing that, because it is at this point still quite a divided issue. And just judging by social media feedback, there still is a lot of concern from residents in the community about people traveling from other zones that are seeing higher numbers and coming here. So we need to be very conscious of that. And we certainly don't want to be doing anything that seems to be in contravention of public health, whether it's official orders or just the best practices that they're promoting. But absolutely, I 100% see the issue and the confusion between zones, and that has been a struggle for us with red and gray zones around us over the past month. And I think we just need to continue doubling down on the fact that tourism is an important industry in Grey County, and it has a ripple effect through our local economy. And it is something that is important to reopen, and we can do it safely and we've seen our businesses doing it safely already. So I think we can just point to some of those success stories and hopefully gain more public support on it. Mm-hmm. But we just need to make sure that it aligns with the wishes of County Council and the emergency control groups.
Of course. You know, one of the things that we've learned, and I don't know if it's helpful for me to share, but we've learned that, you know, the shift in marketing has been less about sales and more about information. And I think that's something that everyone in every stakeholder in the county can and should be able to get behind, in terms of using the channels to talk about what businesses are doing. And one of the things that we've done really well, I think, is to celebrate and put a huge focus on safety protocols. So a lot of social media has been around how to properly wear a mask, how to keep a physical distance, how to enjoy a pub under the new regulations. So, you know, and highlighting those businesses and individuals who are going above and beyond. So it's kind of a fun multiplier, because you're actually reinforcing and making everyone feel more comfortable about those great safety practices we have. you're highlighting those places who do a great job, and it keeps the brand and the destination top of mind, whether people are visiting now, if they're permitted to or not, but it certainly keeps us in the forefront. And I think we should be thinking about, you know, always highlighting the leadership of the destination and what we bring to the table from an innovation perspective, as opposed to, you know, sales, driving traffic, that kind of thing. But I do think there's real room for alignment on that kind of an approach among residents, industry, et cetera. So that we've learned that through our operations, and we've got great community support on social from that kind of approach. So that's some, you know, insights I can share anyway. Okay.
If I could just add one little thing, Andrew, before we wrap up. I just want to say a huge thank you to this group for this conversation today, because it has been phenomenal. Have learned a lot and have certainly backed up, you know, some of our thinking and some of our thoughts. So that's really, really helpful as we are into the summer and the 2021 planning. And the other thing I want to say is just, the last time we talked to this group, we were just presenting to you how we're going to, you know, reevaluate staffing roles and re-merge our departments and do some shifts. And I really am confident that it is working well, because if you look at that list of what's been accomplished so far, and you look at the projects and the focuses and where we're going and how many extra people in our departments combined now are thinking about tourism as such a vital role, it's really, really a good thing. So I'm really glad that we took the opportunity to learn, just as our businesses were doing, and rejig ourselves so that we could take a really strong approach to tourism, to economic development, and taking that step forward. So this is certainly reinforcing that I think we made a good decision, and just really, really proud of the work that this team has done. So I just wanted to make sure that I was able to say that to this group. So thank you.
Amazing, great, thank you. All right, well, we'll move on from the round table. Is there any other business people would like to table before we go on to next meeting dates? As chair, I just want to say happy International Women's Week to everyone on the line. I know it was International Women's Day, I think, on Monday, but I'm saying it's a week. It should be more. I know a lot of people are doing that across the region, so congrats to everyone on the call. We've got fierce leadership in this community, and it's amazing. Next meeting dates.
Andrew, sorry, could I just on a personal note, I think many in the call are aware, but maybe not everybody, that this will be Savannah's maybe last TAC meeting for 1 or 2 as she heads out to be a mom again. So I just wanted to draw that to the committee's attention. And
congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Zoom is really good. I can hide the big belly.
Aw, we want to see it, Savannah. No, we wish you all the very best.
We do.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck. Okay, next meeting dates. Do we have a date in mind?
Mr. Chair, we will look to the members, and when agenda items come up, we will determine an appropriate meeting date with everyone's input.
Okay, so not needed to be discussed now. We'll wait for staff to reach out. All right. Well, if that's not all, I guess we can call for the meeting to adjourn.
So you just need a mover and a seconder to adjourn the meeting.
All right. Sue has moved. Do we have a seconder? Jim, all in favor? Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.